Good afternoon, everybody. Chief Patrol Agent Ryan Landrum coming to you with another WIN podcast from the U.S. Border Patrol Academy in Artesia, New Mexico. Here in the U.S. Border Patrol, we have roughly 22 or 23 sectors that folks have command of. Every person is titled the Chief Patrol Agent. However, in some sectors are considered larger scope, larger complexity than others. Some of those sectors are like San Diego, Tucson, El Paso, the Rio Grande Valley, and then some sectors after that as they descend down in terms of size, AOR or area of responsibility, manpower on staff, etc. Today, I have the opportunity to introduce to you Chief Patrol Agent John Modlin from the Tucson sector, arguably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, sector that is on the southwest border in the entire United States Border Patrol. Chief Modlin, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chief. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. So today you are traveling into Artesia, New Mexico from Tucson, specifically to mentor session 1196 with the U.S. Border Patrol Basic Academy. That holds some significance to you. Why?
Well, because when I started in the Border Patrol in 1995, I was assigned to class 296. So this class is 900, exactly 900 past my class.
So if I would have told you in 1995 you'd still be here 900 classes later, would you believe me?
No, because in that period of time, it had been basically 75 years to get to 296 classes. And now, we've got 90 classes, 27 years, or 900 classes, 27 years later.
Yeah, it's an important distinction for us as we approach our centennial. As you know, in May of 2024, we will reach 100 years. And you kind of chronicled the first 70, the growth pattern of the first 75 or so years, and maybe even going in a little more to the last, say, 10 to 15 years. The growth has been so exponential that folks are eclipsing 900, 1,000 classes later from when they EOD or entered on duty in their basic sessions to what we're EODing today in basic sessions. So right now, for context, we're about to enter on duty class 1,206 or 1206. So 04 and 05 were the latest two classes on deck, and 06 is on their way right now. So congratulations for that. So 900 classes later, but it all kind of has to start somewhere. So it says here you EOD'd with the U.S. Border Patrol on December 10th of 1995 as a member of Academy Class Session 296. You were first assigned to the Chula Vista Border Patrol Station in the San Diego sector. We've had several guests here that have kind of all started their careers in the San Diego sector. It was a huge push back then. This is kind of the center of gravity in the mid to late 90s. Much of the migrant traffic that we were experiencing was traversing through that particular corridor. And as such, just as we do over time, we started focusing the deployment of new resources, human capital, to the Southern California area. So maybe describe for me your experiences in Chula Vista circa 95 and kind of what that traffic pattern looked like against maybe what it is today a little bit.
Absolutely. So when I arrived in Chula Vista in 1995, I certainly had no concept of what I was coming into. Migration certainly was not in the news the way it is now. I don't think it was in the public sort of thought it the way it is now. So I went down there really not fully understanding what I was going to encounter. And, that station covered about 7 miles of border, and it was not uncommon, to make 1,000 apprehensions in a day in that station. I think that year, 95, 96, might have been about 1.5 million apprehensions across the southwest border, with a vast majority of them being in that Chula Vista, Brownfield, Imperial Beach area right there in sort of the very west coast of California.
Yeah. So again, we talked about this before, the context. I think even back then, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about 15 land miles, more or less, right? So at the time, I believe Imperial Beach, aka IB, Chula Vista, and Brownfield each had about 5 miles or so. Is that what it was back then?
Yes. Yeah. Chula Vista had 7 miles. Okay. 7 miles of border.
Right. So all the way going up into the Otay Mountain area was kind of where those 3 stations operated. And the bulk of all the apprehensions in those years in the mid 90s and late 90s were in those 15, 20 miles of border.
Yeah. And so when I got there, my star number, right, that my radio call sign was up in the high 400s, probably 496 or something like that. So I don't know how many agents were at the station, but there were hundreds of agents, probably at least 400 or so for those 7 miles of border.
Yeah, that's incredible. So yeah, for those that are listening and that may not be familiar, star number is the number that the radio operator or your peers can use to identify you without saying, Border Patrol Agent John Modlin, report back to base kind of thing. They can just identify you by a unique star number. Everybody knows your name; it almost becomes your name, and that's how we kind of communicate with each other on a service radio for both brevity and privacy speaking purposes. So from there, you go from Southern California, that's one coast, then you head up to the Great Lakes area of Michigan. This is where you essentially, for lack of a better word, promote to what we called a senior patrol agent, right? That position description or that position essentially no longer exists, but this was a big deal back in the day. When I came in a few years later from you, I came in 2000. And obviously, senior patrol agent was all the rage, and that's what you were trying to compete for, literally, by doing details, whatever it might be. You were trying to earn the opportunity to become a senior. Kind of characterize both for me what your duties as a senior was, and also what that meant for Port Huron in the Detroit sector.
Sure. So, and this, it's worth framing this too. This is right in the right after September 11th. So September 11th had happened, and shortly thereafter, I think there was a recognition that the northern border was fairly wide open in terms of the deployment of agents up there. There were only a couple hundred agents to cover the entire northern border versus just hundreds of agents covering 7 miles down in where I was in California. So there was a push to get more agents to the northern border. Some senior patrol agent positions had opened up there, and so I was selected for one of those. And basically, a senior agent was an agent that was not a supervisory agent, but was seen as an agent that would take more responsibility and sort of mentor younger agents. If there was an incident in the field, they would sort of de facto become the person that would handle that incident until supervisors could get there. So it's kind of someone that could be counted on both by people above and younger agents to sort of guide them along and sort of take care of situations until actual formal supervision could get on scene.
Do you remember how many agents total nationally were employed by the U.S. Border Patrol when you became a senior circa 2009?
I would say probably roughly 6,000.
6,000, right? So it's perfect context because we were in an environment of 6,000 agents where we had time and space to do things like informal mentorship, kind of ask different agents or senior agents to do more, to include things like mentoring, acting supervisory, board patrol when there wasn't one available, those types of things. For context for the listener, we're hovering at about 19,300 border patrol agents today. So 20 plus years later, we're looking at around 19,000, 20,000 border patrol agents on deck, and the opportunities. And oh, by the way, you're talking a couple hundred border patrol agents on the northern border. Then now we're congressionally mandated to the tune of somewhere around 2,250 agents to patrol the northern border. That number comes off the top of our bottom line TO, right? Our table of organization. So if we're congressionally appropriated for 19,000, let's just call it whole numbers, 19,500 agents, then 2,250 come right off the top and are assigned to the northern border. We still have to man the southern border, which is where the bulk of the migration traffic is today. We still have a coastal border where we have New Orleans, Miami, Puerto Rico. We'll talk a little bit about Miami in a little bit, but it's all relative to the politics you kind of spoke of previously as it relates to the San Diego traffic. But it's really good context for the listener who may not be familiar. Can you just describe for me, maybe if there's a younger Border Patrol agent listening, what did you have to do to become a senior? So it was a competitive process. So what was the process like to actually compete for a senior patrol agent?
Yeah, so it was a competitive process, and at the time, when these positions came open, somebody, I don't know who, someone in the administrative staff, I guess, would print out a job announcement and punch 2 holes in it and put it on what they call the hot board at the front of the muster room, where, sort of the most recent intel and information would be, but then also these job announcements would be in a similar situation off to the side. And it was a challenge because more than once, a job announcement would be printed off and somebody would decide that their chances were better if they were the only one that knew of that job announcement, and they just tear it off of there and take it home.
The shenanigans.
Yes. So it was a competitive process. I don't recall an interview for it. I think it was mostly based off of resume.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at the time, again, great context for that newer agent, what was the GS level?
So the GS level for seniors was GS 11.
11.
So yeah, agents were 9s unless they became a senior patrol agent, would be a GS 11.
Right. So you could promote to senior or SU. Could you go from a GS 9 agent to a GS 12 supervisor?
I don't believe you could.
Yeah. So times have changed, right?
Yeah.
So not only have we, bumped up the baseline GS level for a border patrol agent to a GS 12, which formerly was a supervisory border patrol agent, we've kind of also done away with the senior patrol agent based on a litany of issues related to, level setting that entire deck.
Yep.
So super interesting. It's in 2002. So your report here on relatively briefly as it relates to that, and you promote to that actual supervisory border patrol agent. So essentially, what I was trying to characterize is the pathway from to supervisor at the time essentially was through the senior patrol agent, and that's what you did there in the same station of Fort Huron. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I also look at time. So if you're doing the math, you start in 1995 and you promote to a first line supervisor in 2005. You're now a 2-star SES chief patrol agent within 20 years from that date. But it seems like there's a gap between being a border patrol agent and a supervisor, as if you took time to be a border patrol agent, you took time to be that senior, and you took time to be a supervisor. Is that true?
Yeah, so I think that is very true. And one of the things I found, when I got up to Port Huron, it was a relatively small station, and where I'd come from in Chula Vista, there was a prosecutions unit. So when we made an arrest, and it was either going to be someone who, say, a previously removed aggravated felon that was back in the United States, other than our regular just arrest report, we didn't do anything with that prosecution. It went off to the prosecutions unit who handled it. And when I got up north, it was the first time I found myself breaking out sort of the blue immigration law books that we had from the academy and some of these other books. And we were really struggling, me and the other agents up there, sometimes to even figure out what someone's status was, because it was so complicated, some of the issues we were dealing with. And we also had no prosecution unit or anything like that. So one of the things that I recognized very quickly is I was not willing to supervise people in something that I didn't completely understand. So, I recognized that being a supervisor there would mean I would have to sign off on very complex smuggling cases and different things. And to me, I wanted to really understand that well. So I spent the first few years there really immersing myself in casework in Port Huron. And I had some great agents that worked with me that were great mentors as well in that sort of casework, and really walked me through it, because I really did not know. I just came from a place, again, where regular line agents didn't do that work, and so I didn't have that experience. And so it took me a couple of years up there to really learn it and get to a point where I was comfortable enough to say, at this point, I'm okay supervising someone who's doing this very complex casework.
Right. It's a great point. I talked to academy classes. I talked to mentees as well. I think you just spoke literally to 1196 about this kind of thematic. Don't be afraid to fall in love with the process of developing as a leader, right? That may mean spending a little extra time in what we would kind of characterize as that initial stage of leadership between being a senior and a supervisory board situation, where you're okay with spending time to be a subject matter expert, to sign off on these types of packets, to stand in front of troops and know what you're doing. right? So that's really interesting. And oh, by the way, it didn't seem to hurt you at all. You're now the chief of Tucson, right? So
Yes.
Time isn't the only factor, right? Becoming a subject matter expert, becoming good at what you do is equally important because, as I'm sure we'll talk about, the higher you get, the more it becomes important. Right? So from there, you do that for 2, maybe 3 years in Port Huron. And like many of us that we've talked to in the course of the WIN podcast, you get a call from headquarters. In 2008, you then promote to what we call an operations officer in operations and headquarters. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough. I went up there to work in what at that point was called the Northern and Coastal Border Operations Division. At that point, there were 2 separate divisions, operation divisions, one for the Southwest border, one for the Northern and Coastal. And I was also fortunate to land within that division in an area that was called the Strategic Planning Cell. So, what I was basically looking at was sector chiefs would call, and for instance, a sector chief on the northern border, maybe Spokane, would call about air smuggling. They were using sort of kit-built helicopters to sling load large amounts of marijuana across the border, drop them off, and go back. And so, there were issues that they needed help with that they couldn't solve just organically with sector resources. So they sort of pushed that up to us in the strategic planning cell, and we would put together whatever solution we could. And so it was a great time. The other thing that I did up there as well was I was also answering all of the GAO inquiries for the northern and coastal border. So got a lot of experience talking to folks that were recording everything you're saying and are then going to present it back to Congress and say, this is why the Border Patrol is doing this, or this is why the Border Patrol is doing that. So it was an honor to be able to speak for the U.S. Border Patrol, and obviously humbling to be given that ability as well, because there's a lot of liability that comes with that. And I think it was at an age too where we were, at this point, Chief David Aguilar was the chief of the patrol, Ron Colburn was the deputy chief, and the patrol, at least in my very limited vision of it then, especially dealing with those GAO audits, had really switched from talking to GAO auditors basically in anecdotal stories. When they asked, hey, how do you know this is successful? How do you know this is successful? We would just, in the past, just sort of tell anecdotal stories. And then we moved to very sort of qualitative and quantitative descriptions. This is how we know checkpoints are effective. This is how we know this works. And so I was really, again, just honored to be part of that.
Yeah, so and that's both as an ops officer and an assistant chief.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and everybody's experience is generally different as it relates to headquarters. And I obviously have been to headquarters twice, and I strongly recommend emerging leaders do a tour, at least one tour in the Beltway. It's organizationally almost required at this point, so that's one issue. But apart and aside from that, the growth and development you get, both in terms of process, strategy, leader development, exposure to current leaders, right, wrong, or indifferent, doesn't really matter. You're exposed to the way the folks are leading at the national level, is invaluable. I cannot say enough about what you get to do at headquarters if you're willing to fall in love with the process of doing what's asked of you. Did you sign up to do Government Accountability Office audits?
Absolutely not.
Right.
No.
But you're just commenting right now that it probably arguably or inarguably makes you a better chief today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the other thing, to your point about going up there and seeing things, the one thing that I took from it immediately was recognizing what the patrol fights for and what they don't fight for. When you're up there at headquarters, you see things and realize that we're not going to die on every hill, and so you get a little bit of that political savvy. Maybe you don't get to exercise it so much in the operation officer or the assistant chief position, but you certainly see it, whether it's the chief of the patrol, whether it's a division chief. One of the things that was going on up there when I was up there was the branding of the boats,
Wow.
And so the boats on the southern border kept the Border Patrol name on them. The boats on the northern border did not. And, had I not been up there, I probably would not have understood that process, sort of why that happened the way it did, And to your point, I also had a tremendous amount of interaction with Aaron Marine, because Aaron Marine was involved with a lot of the northern and coastal border strategies, which was very interesting because the relationship with Aaron Marine was still developing. I think we were
developing on the heels of this merger.
Yes,
essentially, they're creating Air Marine number one because
Yes.
Border Patrol used to own its own pilots and vessel commanders, etc. Now, in 2003, 2004, we started to go into a new organization of CBP, and you're now 6-7 years on the heels of that, which we kind of reap the benefits of it now. But you were kind of in the dogfights of we're going to keep that patch, we're going to keep our Border Patrol vessel names, etc.
Yes. Oh yeah. In fact, one of the first things that I was handed was a air strategy that was in draft, and it had no coordination with Air and Marine. So it was interesting to me. I mean, I get it; it's all the border, and we're responsible for it. However, we've got these subject matter experts that are down the hall that probably could shine some light on this strategy, and make it better, which was the goal of it. So yeah, I certainly learned the value of those intergovernmental partnerships up there, and then just everything else, how the patrol works, how it functions, why we put resources where we do. So like you, I could not recommend it more to agents. I think it's absolutely critical. And the other side of it too that comes up is, when you're sitting in headquarters as an assistant chief, it's very easy to just send an RFI out to the sectors and say, hey, I need to know every device you have, whatever this type of device is, how many hours does it have on it right now? And the thing that's not understood, unless you've then also been a patrol agent in charge, is that now somebody has to go into the armory and look at every single thing. And before you know it, that's hundreds of hours, for something that could have been discovered a different way.
Right.
So there's value in that aspect of it as well, recognizing that if you're not careful, you can really negatively impact operations just by what you're asking of the field from headquarters, instead of where we should be, which is headquarters supporting the field.
Yeah. It's very apropos that you mentioned that patrol agent in charge position, because you would get the chance to serve as a patrol agent in charge or a PAIC directly after your tenure there at headquarters. Talk to me a little bit about you now hitting a third coast, and you going down to the Miami sector, and what that means both in terms of the experience you gained at headquarters. How did it make you a better PAIC and vice versa? And just kind of characterize for me the coastal environment as it relates to South Florida.
Yeah, so one of the things I found when I was in the northern coastal border was at some point I was asked to help write a strategy for the coastal threat, and I thought, what coastal threat are we talking about? I'd never heard this before, and of course what was being talked about really was the use of the Bahamas by smuggling organizations to launch into the United States. That's what sort of I was put on to see if I could create a plan to mitigate that. And that's when I became, wildly aware of Miami sector and the challenges it faced and how close the Bahamas sit to, particularly to West Palm Beach. And so at some point, the patrol agent in charge position in West Palm Beach became vacant. I applied for it, interviewed for it, and was selected, thankfully. And, interestingly, before I tell you too much about Miami sector, I will tell you that as a GS-14 assistant chief in headquarters, when I was promoted to that position, some of my peers had less than positive things to say, and there was a lot of focus on sort of it's a step down, sort of in quotes is what I was being told, because I was a GS-14 assistant chief, and why would I become a GS-13 patrol agent in charge? And and I expressed to a lot of them that, hey, this is a command position. I'm going to be in charge of this station, and I'm going to have the ability to really set the operational tempo. Of course, the chief of the sector will determine the priorities, but I will set the tempo, and I will determine how we execute on the chief's priorities. And I couldn't imagine a more, to me, a better position in the patrol, right? A position that was more important, more significant, more challenging, and also, as I looked at the Bahamas and West Palm, and sort of the amount of activity that was going across there, I couldn't have been happier to get to that position. So so I was selected for the position and moved out to West Palm Beach, and it was a great station, very small station. When I got there, maybe I remember 15 or 20 agents or something in there. So small station pack, very different than in Tucson sector. We have some GS-15 packs, who have two deputy packs. They have a whole bunch of FOSs and watch commanders and supervisors and tremendous amounts of staff and support. Small station pack, you do everything. You may give muster one shift because there's no one else on duty. There was no DPAC when I was there. It was just supervisors and myself. When things came up throughout the year, self-inspection process, things like that, that was all stuff that I participated in. It didn't come to me with a bow on it, and I signed off on it. I participated in it. If the fire marshal came to inspect the building, I walked him through the building. Did all the public relations stuff for the station as well. So really great experience, very challenging environment because it is truly a 360-degree threat vector in that sector, where there are smugglers that are coming in with both migrants and narcotics. There are migrants and narcotics that have left the southwest border that have Florida as a destination. So there's stuff literally moving in every direction. We know there's narcotics that certainly come into the Keys in South Florida, and then they move up the 95 corridor up into the United States. Right. There's money that's coming back down south to, so there's just a tremendous amount to be done with very few agents. So as you can imagine, and also really no infrastructure. In terms of what we talk about infrastructure, when we talk about sensors and camera towers, obviously none of that exists in Florida. So we became very heavily reliant on our partners and on intelligence. It really becomes using intel as best you can to best deploy the personnel that we have, the very limited personnel we have, and when we can't be there, to have our partners be there.
I think one of the interesting things for me for PIC also is, you kind of at this point probably have aspirations of upper commands, but this was true for me, so I don't know if it was true for you, but I also realized as a patrol agent in charge, I was at Rio Grande City, but that was probably the last time I was going to have that kind of connectivity to the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
You start going to sector jobs, HQ jobs, chief patrol agent jobs. Yes, you're the leader, but you don't get to interact with the men and women actually performing the mission every day, and you kind of realize that that's the last time where you actually have that kind of direct connectivity. You feel the same way?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more, especially in a place like West Palm Beach. I had the privilege of going out with agents when they were doing highway operations, when there were landings, whenever there was stuff going on, when there was people being processed in the in our detention area, all those things. I had I had the ability at least to have my hands in, as the pack, there's work that you can't control, there's work you can, and a lot of times you can say, hey, I'm going to go spend an hour out, and I'm just going to go through the marinas, I'm going to talk to agents, I'm going to talk to the public, that sort of thing. And to your point, very difficult as it is, now in Tucson, if I want to get out into the field, we have to schedule it generally, and usually it'll be like, okay, here comes the old guy to ride the ATV for an hour, But yeah, it's very different, and I think you're 100% right, and it's not. I don't think it's what any of us got into this to do. I think this type of career, this calling, is because we do crave the action of it. We do want to be active. We want to be mobile. We want to make the arrests. Do those things, and then at some point, some of us find ourselves behind a desk.
Yeah, that's right. And you feel it. Right, that BIC nexus. That's the end of that action life that we once kind of craved. So all good things must come to an end. It's patrol agent in charge.
Yes.
You go on to sector staff in 2012. There in Miami as well, promoted to the position of assistant chief patrol agent. Just like every other sector in Miami, also an assistant chief patrol agents, many fewer
mm-hmm.
than what you may have now.
Yes.
But which also kind of lends itself to continuing to fall in love with the process and becoming, really, really good at your job. So kind of characterize those 3 years as an assistant chief there in Miami.
Yeah. So
Change.
so when I got there, I was given oversight of our 3 southern stations. So it was West Palm Beach, Dania Beach, and Marathon down in the Keys, and our intelligence unit and our what we called at the time the mobile interdiction unit, basically like an SRT sort of unit. That was certainly where most of the action was. The other assistant chiefs, I think there were 2 of them at the time, 3 of them, oversaw stations, like 1 station apiece, and programs. So it was just sort of laid out a little differently. And I loved the work. I had the opportunity to bring the SRT or MIU to the RNC and the DNC back in 2012. So in sort of a long history that I feel like I have of being in places where I never expected I would be. I had the great opportunity to do that. And also, while I was in that assistant chief position, I applied for and was accepted to attend the Army's Command and General Staff College out in Leavenworth. So that was a fantastic experience as well. So I spent the better part of a year there, I think 11 months out there, sort of a life-changing experience for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you, so you do this as an assistant chief patrol agent, how do you think it makes you better and more prepared for the follow-on job that you would eventually earn?
So I think, one, I'm still incredibly grateful to the patrol for allowing me to do that. At that time in my life, I was looking at a master's degree, doing it off to the side myself. And of course, it was going to mean a tremendous amount of time on weekends away from my family and just everything else that comes with it and the cost. And this was an opportunity to go to this school, spend 10 months with the DOD and the other interagency partners, and then also come out with a master's degree. While I was there, I determined that I wanted a different master's degree. There were universities that were on the base as well. So I did the master's degree for the Army, which was the Master of Military Art and Science, and then also did a master's degree with Webster University in international relations. And so, when I got back, I think the thing that had changed the most in me, was the recognition of the necessity of partners and how to work with partners. And of course, I made some lifetime friends from there, and that was in 2015, I believe. And so a lot of the soldiers that I was in this class with were, 10 to 15 years in service, of which their last 10 had been at war. So these were, soldiers that had incredible experiences, regardless of what their position was, whether they were infantry or armor or, some sort of administrative position. There was just stuff to learn from all of them. So, and I think I took a lot of great leadership lessons out of that as well. Obviously, we studied some of the great leaders of the world, and I know you went through one of the war colleges as well. And what was very interesting to me was, yes, we had guest speakers come in, generals, very decorated generals. We also had guest speakers come in that were people that were like the head of the Red Cross. Yeah. I think the CEOs of large companies came in and talked, and so we really got a lot of look at leadership from a lot of different perspectives, not strictly from the military perspective. So I think that the thing I got most out of it was those leadership lessons and then how to apply them to what we do.
I love it. I shared a lot of those very same experiences and my appreciation for the quality of American that has dedicated their lives to defending our country. Another huge takeaway for me that I'll never forget and I greatly appreciate. I tell classes all the time, I'm sure you maybe commented this to 1196 as well, but you made the mention of add that to the list of places I never thought I'd be. Mm-hmm. I probably say that 5 times a day.
Yes.
All I did was apply. I worked hard at the U.S. Border Patrol Academy. I became a Border Patrol agent, and then I took on responsibilities that were offered to me. Mm-hmm. Right. So I fell in love with the process of becoming a leader in the organization. Didn't say no to opportunities, and it's taking me all over the world. It's taking me to the White House, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Our experiences together mm-hmm. there. Taking me to Chief of the Border Patrol Academy, a place I thought I'd never come back. And here we are. So there's that. So you also at some point get to promote to the deputy chief patrol agent of the Miami sector, which again, deputy chief is the number 2 in charge of the entire sector, right underneath the chief patrol agent. So you're now the deputy. You're on the heels of a war college. How does the environment change for you now? What is your calculus now? What are you thinking about for the future? You got pretty solid resume leading up to then, so now the light can start coming on. Like there's a real future here for command positions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, interestingly, right, because as we're talking about places we never thought we would be, starting out in Chula Vista, I didn't think I would ever be a supervisor because certainly never the patrol agent in charge of a station. Our patrol agent in charge in Chula Vista was almost seemingly magical, sort of a person that I felt like I would never have that person's experiences. I couldn't do what that person did. And yet here I am sitting in the number 2 position in Miami sector, and so again, never thought I would do it. And at the time, it was unclear. My chief, was getting close to mandatory retirement. So then it suddenly occurred to me that there's 20 chiefs, there's 20 in the field, 20 chiefs, 20 field deputies. And, a certain portion of those deputies probably don't want to come to Miami just because of whatever family reasons, or they want to be the chief where they're at, or they just don't want to go past that position. And so then I realized, wow, this is actually attainable. This thing that is so much higher than I ever thought I would be is actually obtainable. And I will tell you that I did love the deputy position. I thought it was a great position. I thought, the deputy obviously handles most of the discipline and basically runs the staff there at sector. And I just really enjoyed it. I to your point earlier about sort of you get to a point where you realize you may not put handcuffs on people ever again. It's almost that same thought is like as the chief, a lot of times the chief spends a lot of time meeting with other agency heads and doing chief stuff. The deputy is really sort of making sure that the chief's priorities and vision is executed. And I really, really enjoyed being in that position. So had I never left that, just like the patrol agent in charge position or the assistant chief position, I would have been perfectly fine. I already felt like I had far surpassed my what I had envisioned as my terminal graded position in the patrol. So
I'm glad you said that because I've commented on this before, and I will tell anybody that asks. The deputy position, specifically deputy patrol agent in charge and deputy chief patrol agent, are invaluable. I mean, you learn so much. You are the executor of the vision of the chief. So not only do you learn how to execute, but you also learn how to set a vision, right? So I did not get to hold the deputy chief patrol agent job permanently before I got the chief patrol agent, but I did have the opportunity to serve for Chief Gloria Chavez in El Paso for a few months, as well as the deputy chief of operations. But even in those acting capacities, the growth, the understanding of the organization you characterize as being a headquarters, just exponential at the time, and I highly recommend. There's a couple of jobs you really shouldn't skip if you can help it. Supervisory board patrol agent, a deputy of some capacity is really, really important to make yourself the best potential leader possible. So I'm really glad you said that, and I couldn't agree more. So you talk about the possibility of attaining the chief patrol agent. At the time, after that, your predecessor retires based on age. They convert that position to a senior executive service chief patrol agent in Miami. Is that right?
So not entirely correct.
After that.
Yeah. So it was still a GS-15 chief when I was selected for that position. So and then I was the GS-15 chief, I think, for about a year, and then there were 5 new SES chief positions, 4 of them on the northern border, and then, or actually there may have been 1 down south. Well, it might have been 3 up north, 1 down south. And anyway, Miami was one of the 5. Right. And so then I had the, unenviable position of now hoping that I'd be selected for the position I was sitting in. And I was, fortunately. But it also made it fairly unique having gone from PAC to assistant chief deputy chief to chief twice in the same sector, five promotions in the same sector is fairly rare, as you know, in the border patrol.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah. The interesting, I like the context that you added with the SES piece. Over time, we characterized up front our growth, especially in the last 10 to 15 years. Commensurate with that growth comes command positions that align with the size and scope and complexity of the sectors that we lead, the headquarters elements that are out there, et cetera. Chief of the Border Patrol previously did a lot of work to enhance our SES ranks to make it, again, commensurate not only with the size and scope of the organization, but align it also with our sister agencies, things like the field operation, Office of Field Operations, and others. So really large organizations require a healthy staff of senior executives to run these positions. So kudos to those chiefs in the past who really had a vision for enhancing the SES core of the U.S. Border Patrol, and then having the willingness to look at a place like Miami and some other places in the country and bolstering them to SES to obviously attract and retain talent at those levels. So just a bit of context of growth over time. It seems to be a theme right throughout this entire conversation. So a lot of good history for everybody listening. So this is 2019-ish now, and you were also asked to go. I think this is right before their promotion. Is that correct? The SES conversion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So right as you're sitting in the GS-15 Chief Patrol Agent in Miami, your phone rings. It's headquarters. So there's a story, there's a moral there. Don't answer the 202 number twice now. But the phone rings and they say, hey, Chief Modlin, we need you to come to headquarters and do a long-term detail assignment. Here is kind of one of the acting deputies of operations. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I will tell you, I don't believe long-term was ever mentioned. I believe they just said, hey, we need you to come up to headquarters for a short period of time.
Story.
Yes, and so to your point earlier, I said yes. I do think that's one of the qualities that we need to have is to be able to sacrifice when necessary, and so I did. I certainly was. No one looks forward to leaving their family and their sector, but so I went up there to be the deputy chief of operational programs. Yeah. So I went up, and this was, to put this in context, this was in 19 going into 20 when there was sort of in the public knowledge the first real talk about caravans. Yeah. So this was a lot of caravans, large irregular migration surge, and we also had two very high-profile deaths in custody of children, and so I'd gone up, and again, sort of probably not really fully comprehending what I was getting involved in. I thought that ops programs was really focused on ATVs and horses and canines and SUASs, things like that. And then it turns out it also has a huge chunk of detention and prosecutions and those sort of things. And so I very quickly became sort of embroiled in all of that. Our detention practices, we were just starting at that point to utilize soft-sided facilities. There's also a lot of programs coming out of Border Patrol headquarters as well to sort of help with some of that irregular migration. So very, very challenging for me, quite honestly, sitting in Miami. I was aware of a lot of the things going on in the southwest border, but not as aware as I need to be to go up there and now be in charge of all that. So a little bit humbling from a leadership perspective. One of those situations where, and I think a lot of us face it, we come into a position and the people that we are now going to lead know more about the subject than we do. Yeah. So, obviously I had to do that thing, which we have to do, is sometimes be very humble and say, I really need you to explain this to me from A to B because I don't do this in Miami. Right. This is not how we do things in Miami, but I know it's how we do things here. So a lot of drinking from the fire hose when I got up there. And again, in the theme of not knowing where you're going to end up, I think it was probably a month or two into what turned out to be 10 months at headquarters. About a month or two into my tenure there, I was asked to to go to the White House for some meetings over in the West Wing. And again, this sort of, my background and where I came up in the patrol, never did I think I'd ever be in the West Wing of the White House. Yes. And so, as you know, the very first time I was there, I met you, and or didn't meet you, but ran into you in the White House. And if there's ever a place you don't expect to see someone it's in the White House. And yeah, I still remember it clear as day. You had a suit on, and literally like the gears in my head ground to a halt because I realized I know him. Yeah. But why is he here? What is going on? Why are we both in the White House? And it took a minute, and then of course you and I talked, and it made sense to me. So yeah, that trip to DC, very educational for me. And then it ended with sort of the icing on the cake was me testifying before Congress as well. So there were hearings about family separation, things like that. Different policies and processes that were taking place, and so I testified before one of the congressional committees about how we were securing the border. So again, another great experience and another place that I never would have thought I would ever find myself, which would be testifying before Congress or weekly in the White House.
Yeah, that was quite robust times with engagement with levels of government that we probably hadn't dealt with previously as an organization. We talked on the podcast a lot about how politically charged the nature of the business that we do now is, and largely that started in the last 5-6 years where the issue of border security, national security, has become a hot button topic, requiring us to go to the White House, requiring us to testify on the Hill on unpopular things, not just a state of the border, if you will, kind of briefing to Congress or congressional and Senate staffs and even members, really. So you get a get out of jail free card after 10 months. They ship you back to Miami, and then you become converted.
Yes. So just within a month or two, perhaps. It was very shortly after I got back to Miami. Miami was converted to an SES, and I was selected as the SES chief in Miami.
All right, so you again sacrificed for the organization, and it paid off where you again fall in love with the process of doing what's required for national security, and good things will happen. Right, you worked really hard in the positions that you were asked to serve in, and things happen. So how long did you do in Miami as the SES chief, after you got back on detail?
It's a loaded question.
It is a loaded question.
Yeah, so not long enough. So I was in Miami, and I did what no one should ever do, which was declare when I got home from headquarters that that hey, I'm done. I went up, I served my time. That should be it. And then shortly after, and I can't remember the time, but I want to say it was within months. I was asked to go out and assist in Tucson Sector.
And did they give you a time frame again or no?
No.
Yeah, again, no time frame.
But I was smarter about it this time, and I made sure that I was prepared, and brought as much stuff as I could.
Yeah.
And went out to Tucson Sector to assist there, and that also took 10 months. I was also there for 10 months as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of underplay a little bit. Assist is one thing, but go serve as the acting chief.
Yes.
That's a whole other thing, right?
Yes.
So you're now, physically prepared is one thing in terms of gear, right? But the preparation that you've done, spending the last 10 or so months at headquarters, has opened the aperture so the learning curve, what I'm suggesting, was much shorter. Had you gone from straight Miami chief over to Tucson, there may have been a larger learning curve, but you're already kind of really in tune. You're all the A to Z's of all the things, which apply very, very squarely to Tucson in many cases. And the deaths you talk about were in El Paso, but that could have easily been Tucson.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's litigation that kind of governs how you treat minors, and which complicates detention in Tucson. So suffice to say, you're very prepared professionally for the opportunity to go serve as the interim chief of the Tucson sector.
Yeah, so I think I was. I mean, at least on paper,
Sure.
I think that's a hard thing to say because, as you pointed out earlier, Tucson is our largest sector in terms of personnel. So, you've got more than 3,000 agents there, and you've got all the professional staff, and just the most challenging operational environment I've ever seen. I remember when I first got there, and I had a meeting with all the patrol agents in charge from the 9 stations, and they were all sort of doing what patrol agents do, which was complain about why they couldn't do this here and why they couldn't do this here. And so I had said to them, basically, there's nothing you have here that no other sector has. That this Swanton deals with this problem, Detroit deals with this problem, El Paso has this problem. What I think I've realized since then is that I don't know another sector that has all of those challenges to it, in one sort of confined space. I was very fortunate. The other part of this was that when I got on scene there, there was a very strong staff there as well. There were some major gaps. Myself being the acting chief, there was no deputy and there was no chief of operations, division chief of operations. So basically, the 2 and the 3 positions were vacant as well. So in a very sort of unorthodox move, I had the patrol agent in charge from Nogales, who I'd only met once and did maybe a 4-hour ride along with him, come up and act as the deputy, and then a gentleman that I knew from Detroit, who I had a tremendous amount of respect for. He was my supervisor when I was in Detroit. He was working as a 14 with the technology out there. Had him act as the division chief of operations, because one thing I knew is he just had an incredible motor on him, just no stopping him, And so we had a lot of challenges ahead of us. But then the rest of that team was so well fleshed out with people that just great experience, that just had just tremendous competency in that staff there. And over that 10 months that I was there, I was able to fill a couple of the patrol agent in charge positions, and fill a couple other key positions, and was incredibly challenged. Every day was busy, to give you an idea. The fiscal year 18, 19, and 20, Tucson sector had about 60,000 apprehensions each year. In 21, when I got there, there was 190,000 apprehensions. So we had tripled the apprehensions in a single year. So with that came, a lot of unaccompanied children. So we opened a soft-sided facility to have children stay there instead of in our regular, short-term holding areas. So there were a whole host of challenges that, again, I was not dealing with back in Miami sector, but a fantastic experience. And those 10 months that I was acting as chief there will definitely stick in my mind as some of the most challenging and rewarding times in the patrol.
That's awesome. So you're acting, and that comes to an end. You go back to Miami.
Yep.
202 rings again.
Yes. So 202 rings again very shortly after I get back to Miami.
Yeah. What was that called?
Probably again after announcing to the family that, hey, I'm done with this travel and stuff. We're good. So then the call comes that, I'm now going to be the chief of Tucson sector. Big upheaval with that, of course. I came out first. My family came out once we were like halfway through the school year. The good news is I was able to land in that, in the largest sector in terms of personnel, with 10 months of experience already under me. So I already knew everybody. I built, I think, a lot of trust in those relationships. I really found the people that were sort of the very high performers, and sort of knew who that team was. And we had really done some great stuff. So I think, I felt like I was welcomed back there, where I think the first time when I was there in the acting role, there was naturally a little bit of suspicion and hesitancy about sort of what my intent was and how my priorities would affect the way Tucson sector was running. So now, again, it's an honor, obviously, to run a sector that size. It's an honor to be any sector chief, certainly an honor to be a patrol agent in charge, to do any leadership position in this organization. But, It's honestly humbling. Every day I pull up to that to our sector headquarters, and the gate opens, and we've got that tremendous sector compound with all the buildings on it, and I see the sector headquarters building, and I just think, this is again something I thought I would never be able to achieve.
Right. Awesome. So we've come to the moment in our podcast where I like to, we talked a little bit about your promotion to Chief of Tucson. As the chief, right? And turn the table over to you for an opportunity to very concretely talk about maybe the 2, 3, 4 things that are important to you now, since this is the What's Important Now podcast. Maybe give you the opportunity, the floor to speak to audiences about what's important to you now.
Sure, thanks. There's so much here that I can cover. I think first and foremost, talk about one of the things that I'm most passionate about, and it is trying to get agents and the public to recognize what it is we do and what our mission is. And our mission is to secure the border ultimately. It's not an immigration mission. It's not any of these other missions that seem to creep in, and we seem to get painted with that brush. There shouldn't be sides to border security. People can have their thoughts about immigration, and how much immigration is good. All those things. However they want to quantify that. But our role is to interdict things that are crossing the border, to protect the country, and to make sure that we're aware of what comes into the country. So I think one of the biggest challenges we have now, as you know, and certainly everyone in the agency recognizes, is how do we secure that border while we're in this role that we really were not built for, which is the caring and feeding role and getting caught up in a lot of other things. And, I think the Border Patrol's made some great strides recently in the processing coordinators and some contract coordinators and different things to get Border Patrol agents back to what it is we're built for, which is to secure the border and just do that. And the other part of it too, as I explain to agents all the time, because agents can certainly get their morale can certainly get worn down by they hear a lot of times, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a vilification of the Border Patrol. There's a vilification of what we do, which to me is heartbreaking. I remember when I was up in headquarters in 19 and even testifying about this, while we were waiting to be appropriated, agents were bringing in diapers from home, and bringing in baby food from home and bringing in toys and games from home, while at the same time people are vilifying us for what we're doing, and that has always been an issue that I try to get people to understand that ultimately, when someone comes into our custody that has crossed the border between the ports of entry, it's only our job to determine what pathway they go into, what's the appropriate legal pathway for them to go into. Ultimately, if they're found that they have reason to stay in the United States or no reason to stay and they're going to be removed from the United States, neither one of those is a win or a loss for the Border Patrol. That's an immigration judge, that's CIS, that's everybody else. Our job is just to get back out there and secure the border and know what's coming across that border, and know if it is a migrant that is, moving for economic reasons or for whatever reason, persecution, or is it someone that intends to harm us, intends to harm the United States? Is it a criminal? Is it a sex offender? Is it a rapist? Is it a murderer? Or is it, again, someone that has ill will towards the United States and wants to carry out an attack against the United States? That's what our focus has to remain. And I think the challenge is to ensure that agents focus on that and don't get distracted by the noise around us, the constant vilification or everything else. Obviously, I think too, and I see this in Tucson literally every day, is the tremendous humanitarian work that Border Patrol agents do that nobody sees. And, I wish I had my stats with me, but I know this fiscal year we're well up over 2,500 rescues in Tucson. And, you've spent time in Tucson. A rescue in some places is, driving a UTV out to someone who's, in and out of consciousness because of the heat, and they're rescued, which obviously is fantastic. A lot of times in Tucson, that's putting a Black Hawk helicopter right up against the side of a mountain at 8,000 or 9,000 feet, and agents roping out of the helicopter to get to someone that has a compound fracture, putting them into a litter, and then basically riding the litter with them to provide aid to them while they're being taken to somewhere where more advanced medical care can come to. We've got hundreds of EMTs and paramedics in Tucson that are out there every day saving the lives of people that are crossing the border. Of course, they're also, there to help other agents. They're certainly there to help the public as well. But I think very often the humanitarian part of what we do gets lost in the noise, especially in the vilification. When that helicopter goes up against the side of that mountain, every agent in that helicopter and the Air and Marine personnel or whoever's flying for us, it could be Pinal County, it could be Arizona DPS, they're all in danger. They're all risking their lives to save a person that decided they were going to cross the border illegally and then get up 8,000, 9,000 feet in the mountains to make that journey and to avoid detection. So I don't think that is recognized nearly enough. And I think it's incredibly important. I think that there's a vision of us maybe that's a little bit sort of like automatons and we just do this. We are all fathers, sons, brothers, daughters, mothers. We all get it. We're all human beings. We all understand the humanity of what we're dealing with. And we will risk our lives to save those people, and we've had agents, as you know, we've had agents drown, we've had agents die to save people that are crossing the border. So I think that's very often lost. And, I do, know the Academy here has the Silent Partner Program, which is one of my favorite things that's happened in the Academy where agents, have that card in their pocket of an agent and to have, my silent partner is Earl Roberts, who was killed by liquor smugglers up in Michigan, during Prohibition. But some of those agents are carrying cards of agents that have died in the line of duty trying to save somebody else in the desert. And I just think those two things are incredibly important to me.
Yeah, Silent Partner Cards is obviously near and dear to my heart as well. For context, what we do in the Silent Partner Cards is take the synopsis, the date of death, the years of tenure, etc., put them on a small laminated card, and we issue those out to trainees to kind of, just to your very point, indoctrinate them, not as a pejorative, right, but indoctrinate into the culture of humanitarian response. We are charged with a serious mission, and along a part of that mission is also saving lives. It's also a willingness to give your life, should that be called, you be called upon to do that, and we don't take that very lightly here at the U.S. Border Patrol Academy. When we start from day one to kind of socialize that. So I do want to wrap it up. A couple of things I kind of just to put a bow on things. Some themes that I heard throughout this. Number one, fall in love with the process of developing as a leader. I think that was pretty rich throughout the entire conversation. Number two, don't be afraid to take an unconventional path. Not everybody's path is the same, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. Just work really hard in the jobs that you've been asked to do, and good things will happen. And then number three, as an overarching theme, don't forget the mission you signed up for, the oath you took to the Constitution, and don't allow the reality or the perception of politics impact the way you execute the mission that you signed up to do. I think those three things kind of really encapsulate our time today. And I'd like to thank you for coming all the way out from Tucson Sector in lovely Tucson, Arizona to eastern New Mexico to engage as a mentor with the next generation of Border Patrol agents. It's vitally important to me, as you know, so thank you very much for that. And with that, honor first.